Have you ever tried to eject a floppy disk and have this happen? The motor spins, but it won't come out. And then you have to resort to the paperclip hole to get it out. The drive reads and writes just fine. I'm actually booted from the floppy drive right now. I can save files, I can load apps like Disk First Aid without problem. The only one issue is it won't eject. And the reason for that is there's a teensy tiny gear inside the drive that's broken. The good news is that Koba of Kero's Mac Mods has come to the rescue with his excellent Tuno gear that solves the problem. Tuno gear is also sold by Mac Effects in the USA. Now what I'm about to show you applies to all Sony 800K and Sony 1.44 megabyte auto inject floppy disk drives that have the OMRON brand eject motor. If your drive has a Sanwa brand eject motor, Tuno gear is not compatible. But I have some good news. I found a solution for you Sanwa motor folks that I'll introduce later on in this video. So let's get started. I'm going to show the disassembly in this section of the video. If you do not have a Color Classic and if you're not interested in seeing me tear the machine down, this video is fully indexed. You can go ahead and jump to the next section, which will show the floppy drive fully removed. For the rest of you, let's get started. What you'll need to do is put your Color Classic on a soft surface. I simply had a very convenient plush chair, which makes it very nice. It boosts it up to the right height. And you are going to need to start by removing the motherboard, which requires you to remove this back panel. To do this job, you're going to need to have possibly a screwdriver to remove the back panel, unless you have nice screws like mine. And you will definitely need to have a Torx T15. You don't necessarily need to have such a long neck as this, but I have linked this tool for you in the text description below. Now this back panel may look a little bit different than your Color Classic because the motherboard inside is not a Color Classic. It is a Mystic LC575. It also has the Apple IIe card, which is what you're seeing here. And these bolts are very nice. I actually was introduced to these by Koba. And these, you can use a screwdriver if you like, but they're really great because all you have to do is just turn them with your fingers. And really fabulous bolts. I have put a link to them where you can buy them on AliExpress. And these are the 10mm variety, which is nice for this particular back panel. And it just pulls right out here, like this. And we can see here, it says, it's actually signed by Koba, and he put 2 JDW, and he made it on November 23rd, 2021. So just about 2 years ago from the making of this video. I actually have a video about Koba making this. This was created and cut down from an LC575 back panel. So he handcrafted this to fit the Color Classic. And it just goes to show how amazingly handy Kay is and how precise he is as well in his work. So be sure to check out that video. And then our motherboard, we'll just grab it behind the ports here and pull it up and out. I know some of you are curious about what I've got on my motherboard, so I'll just give you a quick overview. This is the 32 megabyte SIMM. There's actually more RAM than this because there's soldered RAM on the motherboard, but 32 megabytes of RAM in the SIMM form. And then this white socket, I soldered this in within the past week because CayMac Vintage very kindly sent me this brand new custom ROM SIMM. And it's in beta right now, and I don't know all the details of when it will be sold and how much and all that. But basically, this is coming, folks. And right now I can confirm that it kills the painfully slow RAM checking at cold boot, which means that instead of just having 32 megabytes, I could install 128 megabytes in here, which would take forever without this ROM SIMM because of the RAM checks at cold boot. But because of this custom ROM SIMM, just like when a custom ROM SIMM is used in other computers, you can bypass that initial RAM checking at cold boot, which is just fantastic. And then behind this SIMM, we've got the VRAM, and this is Koba's special VRAM, which is 60 nanoseconds. It's super fast, and it allows high overclocking. And that's really what we see behind it. We have this is a custom 68040 that I installed, which has an FPU. And the normal LC575 does not have that, so basically it's a CPU upgrade. I added the heatsink to it. I also have another CPU with a bigger heatsink, and I did a video on that. This is my PRAM battery. It's 3 LR44s. It only lasts about 45 days, though, if you keep it unplugged from the wall, but it's all that would fit. A AAA or AA battery pack just wouldn't fit. As you can see, I just don't have the space for it. And then behind the battery pack, I've got K-Koba's Spicio clock, which allows me to clock this to about 50 megahertz. And then I added a Noctua 40mm fan, which very conveniently bolts to the edge of my 2E card. And it doesn't really vibrate that much to cause any problems, but I added some little spacers here to make sure that it's not going to vibrate around. And so this is really an action-packed motherboard. And of course, it's been recapped with OSCON capacitors, so that you have the absolute lowest ESR, which is required to get the highest overclocks if you get Spicio clocks. So again, I got videos on all of this, so be sure to check those out for more information. So we'll now take out the 2 screws near the top of the machine, near the handle. And then the 2 screws at the base of the machine. We can then pull the top straight up and off. Now here is where the motherboard was. This is a metal shield down here at the bottom. Then we have the speaker area, and above that the power connector and analog board. We're going to have to remove all of this. You can see I have 2 speakers because I did the stereo mod. Check out my video on that if you'd like to do it. Most likely you'll only have 1 speaker to disconnect, but in my case I have 2, so I'm going to disconnect those right now. I now put the machine on a hard surface to make it easier to work with. I have an alligator clip lead with 2 fairly large clips on both ends because I'm going to discharge the CRT. It's most likely already discharged because it has a bleeder resistor inside, but just to be sure, I'm going to clip one end to a flathead screwdriver, and then I'm going to clip the other end to where this green wire is connected to this exposed wire here. That's ground. Make sure it's connected there. And then I am going to put the tip underneath this suction cup, because underneath the suction cup there are little prongs there. Push on one of those, the other one just pulls right out. So I'll go ahead and remove my discharging clip, and we need to remove this clip as well. And on the opposite side there's a little clip you can pull on because there's little teeth in it. You're going to have to pull on that. Don't pull on it too hard so you break it off. There's metal fatigue you might have to worry about, but it'll just pull right out like this. So here's where I just disconnected that. And then down here behind these wires, there are these wires here that are connected to a little white connector, and it's not locked. You just wiggle it and pull up on it, and then it comes right out. And then over here we have a little connector which also needs to be disconnected. And then we have 2 more things. We want to pull this straight back, just slightly wiggling it, pulling it straight off the yoke here. And then we need to disconnect the black and white wires. They are in a locked connector, so you're going to need to take your flathead screwdriver and insert it in here and kind of twist it towards this direction to depress that locking mechanism so it will come right out. So here it is viewed from the back. We're going to pull out the analog board, so we don't want this to catch on anything. And this wire we're not going to pull out, right? It's going to stay up here. So I'm just moving things a little bit out of the way, because, and also this, you don't want it to catch on anything, because the analog board we're just going to pull straight back, right? Just like this. I'm viewing it from the side, it just pulls out like so. Now there's these little grooves in here that allow you to actually pull it up and then out. Now here's our floppy drive, but we have to slide him back and out. Since I have the stereo speakers, I need to remove one of them, which isn't too hard since it's just affixed with Velcro. And then I need to remove the cable that goes to the floppy drive, and I'll just put it down below. And then there's this tab, which can be pressed. Now, I don't want you to press it too hard because it's plastic and it's very old, so you don't want to break it off. Otherwise, there's not going to be anything to keep your floppy drive in there. So I'm going to push down just a little bit, and that will allow me to pull him back out. But we see that my other speaker is touching a little bit, so pull up on him. Then I can slide him out. Now our floppy drive is housed in a plastic mounting bracket, and we are going to need to remove the drive from this bracket before we can do anything. You've got 4 Phillips head screws that secure it, 2 on each side, so we just need to remove all of them. And now with the screws removed, we can just pull up on him and very easily pluck him from the plastic bracket. And now we have another little bracket from which we need to pull the drive out. But to make that job easier, I recommend putting a floppy disk in, because right now the eject metal piece right here is in a bad place, and if we put in a disk, then it makes it much easier for us to just pluck the drive right out, and then we can just eject him like that. Now it's important to remember that Tuno Gear is only compatible with auto inject floppy drives like the one we just removed, which is over here on the right. It is not compatible with manual inject floppy drives, which look in this form. This was removed from an LC520, and they always have this little black dust door on and the metal frame on top. And usually when you put in the discs into a manual inject, you have to push it in all the way. And then it has a little eject button here. And then when you put the disc in an auto inject, you don't push it in all the way. At some point it pulls it in and clunks down, and it tends to eject it a little bit farther. And here's our 1.44 megabyte drive. We see it was made in 1993 by the date stamp over here. It looks incredible. No dust bunnies anywhere that I can see. Looks like it might have even been serviced at some point. The grease, if I touch it, it's not really hardened up. So I'm still going to service it as if it did have hardened grease. But still, it looks incredibly good. And really the main problem with this drive is just the eject motor. Thankfully, it's an OMRON motor, so Capacitor's Tuno Gear will be compatible with it. And we will just proceed right here by removing the motor. So we remove the first screw here, and the second screw is over here. And then in back, there's a little connector that attaches the motor to the circuit board, and he just pulls right out. Now if I flip the motor over, we can see one of the gears on the back, and if you very carefully push this black piece over here to this direction, then you'll be able to pop up this metal piece. Be very careful because there's black tabs on this side. You don't want to break those off. And wow. Yeah. There he is, folks. And here's an extreme close-up. Yeah, he's busted up pretty good right there. This piece broke off from this side. And here is Capacitor's Tuno Gear. Now again, this is only compatible with OMRON motor gearboxes, not the Sanwa motor gearboxes, but I found an excellent video by Okinaki's Retro PC Life, which tells us that the Color Classic 2 and the LC3 often have floppy drives using the Sanwa motor. The two gearbox types look quite similar, but when viewed side by side, we see the Sanwa gear is smaller, and the hole in the middle is a different size too. If you have a Sanwa motor gearbox, I'm pleased to report that CayMac Vintage sells the gear you need, and I've put a link to that in the text description below. Okay, let's take a closer look at the gears under a microscope. Right in the middle, we've got the broken gear that I removed from the drive, and then over to the right of that, I have another unbroken stock gear. And then over here on the left, I have the gear that I used in the past that was created by a gentleman from Italy. And then up here, the white one, is the Tuno gear. So right now, under the microscope, we are looking at, you can see the broken gear. And See a little hair there, but basically the shape of the good fins are like so, and then we have these fins up here at the top. They're covered in a little grease, so they look a little bit bad, but basically some are broken off, but you get the idea. And then if I move over, this one is the outer fins of a stock gear that is good, that was never broken. So if that one I removed was never broken, it would look like this. And then the inner fins, a little focusing, will look like this. I guess somewhat of an egg shape, right? And then if I move all the way over here, this is the gear from Italy that I reviewed in the past. And you can see the very tips of it, it looks a little off color. There were tiny little bubbles in parts of it, but nothing that ruined the integrity of it. I think it's made from resin. I know it's made from a mold, so it's probably resin, but if we go down and look down lower, you can see there's some parts where it wasn't adequately cleaned. But we're in a pretty high magnification, mind you. So here are the outer fins. Let's see if I can get better focus. Outer fins. I think you can barely see some of the bubbles. Let me adjust the light. I don't know if you can see that or not, but little areas where it was bubbled. Again, I don't know if it's resin or not. I'm pretty sure it must be if it's made in a mold. But yeah, you can kind of see some of the bubbling in that area. The feel to my fingers when I touch it is just ever so slightly matte. It doesn't have that glossy, super slick feel. It's not rough, but it's not super slick glossy, okay? And again, this never had any grease applied to it. So you can see in the middle of these two fins, right, there's a little bit of gunk in there that it's from the molding process that wasn't cleaned out. Okay, and then we're gonna go over and look at tunnel gear. So here, let me see if I can get better focus and adjust my lighting. I don't know if you can see better with this way. Okay, so the tunnel gear, again, the outer fins compared to the Italy gear, right, are also somewhat egg-shaped. The main difference is the inner fins. Here are the inner fins. I think I got it focused now. It's hard to see because it's all white, but the inner fins are, even though this part might be a little bit of egg-shaped, they are not as fat as the others. So I'll go back to the Italian gear here. See how fat these are, right? And if I go back to the stock gear, here's the broken stock gear, and then to the non-broken stock gear. So they're fat, right? And then if we go to tunnel gear, they are thinner. Now, on the tunnel gear website, it explains this by saying the gear shape has been redesigned so that the surface load between the gears is evenly applied. Therefore, it is slightly tapered more than the original shape. So that is the explanation for this. Redesigned so that the surface load between the gears is more evenly applied. Now, I'm not a mechanical engineer, so I can't comment on that, but I'm just going to trust Kay knows what he's talking about here. And well, once I install it, we're going to see how it is. And this is just a quick bottom view of the broken gear. You can see there's looks like donut shape in the middle, and then the outer fins, right? And then here's a stock gear that isn't broken, so another donut shape. And then it kind of sinks down, and then you see the outer gears, and it's got this little circle that's sunk into it here. Right. So again, this is a stock gear that's not broken. And then if we go all the way over to Italy, ooh, here we are. It's flat. It's perfectly flat. So there's no raised part or anything like that. But you can kind of see the little bubbles maybe, right? Some of the bubbling there, it's a little bit easier to see now. And you can see it's in the tips of some of the gears. So I think this is just a quality issue. It's a good gear, and the ones that I have installed haven't failed me, but I just wanted to show you for the sake of comparison. And then Tuno gear. So Tuno gear is, it's got a donut too, but it's really fat. It's a fatter donut, kind of, right? And then you get the outer gears. So the stock gear is a smaller donut, right? Type of shape. So this is raised up higher and this is sunk down lower. And then Tuno gear, right? Its donut is bigger, that's raised up higher, and then this is sunk down lower. And then on the Italian gear, it's continuous from here to there. And I'm not an expert on these gears, so I don't know if that really makes any difference, but I just wanted to show you. And by the way, the Tuno gear, whenever I put my finger on it, it feels silky smooth to the touch. So smooth. I mean, it looks and feels, with the exception of this donut shape on the bottom, very much like the stock gears. The one from Italy, you know, you can see the bubbles here and you might say, hey, that's not so great. But when you're not zoomed in on this level, you can't see these bubbles. And when you feel it, it feels pretty smooth, but again, it's more of a matte texture when you touch it. And Kay's gear, the Tuno gear, is so smooth. So that's why I say this is really a fantastic substitute for the stock gear. Now, in order to remove these gears, we are going to need to remove this circuit board. And unfortunately, we're going to need to pull it straight up because there are parts underneath it that require it to be pulled up straight. But as you can see, there are two wires that are soldered there. Now you can use a desoldering wick if that's all you have. But in my case, I have a Hakko FR301 desoldering gun, and that's what I'm going to use right now. I've got my 1.6 millimeter tip in there, so let's see if I can make quick work of it. Okay, looks like I got him. And then once you have those desoldered, let's okay, they are desoldered. On the bottom, we cannot move the gears because we need to remove this gear over here first. And see this little metal protrusion? That needs to be over here on the opposite side in order for us to pull out the PCB. And so we're just going to need to very carefully lift up on him, take him out, and then this will move freely. Okay, and so the original position it's in is over here, so it's facing this direction, and we need to make it the opposite over here. And that's because directly under the circuit board, right over here, actually over here, there's a little plastic tab that this guy moves. And if the tab is in the locked position, which is what happens is if you leave it here, that's in the locked position, then you're not going to be able to pull off the circuit board, or you'll damage it if you try. So make sure, that's why we took off this gear, make sure that this little guy is over here. And then we have to move this little black plastic tab back. Now, be very careful with him because you don't want to, you know, pull it too much and make it snap off. But while he's being pulled back, I'm going to try to slip my very tiny screwdriver underneath and slip a fingernail underneath there, and then just start prying. And don't apply too much force to the circuit board because you don't want to snap anything off. And again, if this guy is in the wrong position down at the bottom, you will snap something inside here when you're trying to pry up on him. So Be very careful about that. Okay, we heard a little pop there, right? Then this side. Okay, so he's coming up now. And keep in mind that these two wires are on top of him still, but that's okay. We're just going to pull him up and out. We can see why, right? We needed to move that guy because when the protrusion is in the normal position, which is here, then the little flap locks in place on this guy here. And what we did is we moved him the opposite direction so he would be away from here, and that's how we were able to get this circuit board off. And then over here, you can actually take out the wires. They're not glued on or anything like that. You can just move it out of your way. And then there is, in order to get the big gear off, we are going to need to pinch this. I got my needle nose pliers. So I pushed down to pop out the gear, and that makes it easier to get him out. And there he is. So the little guy that was sitting on top of him. And then that will allow us to pluck out the other gears. I must say I can see why this one broke. It seems like he's just sealed in there and falling to pieces as I'm trying to get him out. Okay. There we go. So now I need a Q-tip and clean this out with alcohol. So I'll just go ahead and start in with my 100% IPA and try to clean up all this crud as best as I possibly can. Some of the harder places, a toothpick can help. And now all of the parts are perfectly cleaned and dried. It's now time to lube everything. I'm going to use Molykote EM30L, which is a newer version of pretty much the same grease that Apple used back in the day. This was kindly donated to me by Joe, who's based in the UK, since I can't buy it here in Japan. And it could be that you might not be able to buy it either. But the good news is that many of you may be able to buy the SuperLube brand. This is SuperLube multi-purpose synthetic grease with PTFE, and this is SuperLube oil, also with PTFE. And the great thing about this is you can mix them. You cannot mix this oil with other greases, but you can with the SuperLube grease. So this is a great option, an alternative to EM30L. So I'm going to start with a toothpick, putting a little bit of EM30L onto the back of the gear, and we want to basically use it sparingly so we don't put too much. And of course this gear is Tuno gear. So I'll add just a tad to the little stick here that he's going to go on. Okay. I will skip the gear that goes next to it for now and do the gear that goes here, which is this larger one. We'll plunk him down. Now, for the larger gear that goes in here, I have put grease in here in the past, but there wasn't any grease here, and I think maybe you don't really need it because it's just plastic on plastic. So I'm just going to put that big gear down like this, and it goes around just fine. Now we want to make sure our little guy over here is positioned like this for now, so you can see that this is the normal position that it's going to be in. That means we want to put it on like this. See how it's facing, right? But then we got to move it out of the way. So we could do it all the way the 180 degrees, right? Which means it'll be over here. Now we can put in our final gear, because once we put in the final gear, we won't be able to turn these. Only the motor, when electrically powered, will be able to turn those. So I'll just put some grease on the point that will touch and in the hole. So again, as I move in, we see there's a little bit of play in the gears, right? Over here with Keikoba's gear. And again, that's what he said on his website, that it was deliberately designed to be like that. So we'll just have to test it and see if that affects noise or anything else. Now, because some of these gears will touch this top metal frame, I'm going to put a little grease on these three here. And so now you got to be careful about these pieces of plastic, slipping it under them. And then we push down. Probably need a tool here. Pry him out a little bit. There we go. Now, getting the circuit board back on is always a bit of a fiddly mess because you've got to get these wires on top of it, right? So, you know, we can bend them and they'll bend back, but I don't want to bend them too much. Get one up and the other one falls down. Okay, maybe I got it, didn't bend it too much. Okay, they're both on top, that's good. Want to make sure it goes down straight. Wires aren't getting crushed. Okay, seems to have gone down. And then the wires, they stick up just a little bit, but when I solder it down, I'm going to push it down and then apply solder to it. We need to put our wires back in. Actually, I'm going to lift up on this gear so I can turn it and move it back to its regular position. And I'll put down the gear. And then I can put on my cap here. Now that the eject motor is removed, I'm going to do a tear down because I'm going to clean it off and then lube it again. And the first step is to remove these springs at their base, not at the top. And you can use a little tool for that, but to remove them is pretty easy. You can just pinch, pull down, and then pull out. And there it is. It came off. And then on the other side, there's also another one. You just pinch, pull down, and pull out. And now it's off as well. And then we want to make this part go down without a disc being in there. Because right now it's open, it's ready to accept a disc, right? And we don't want that. We want to knock it down without a disc inside. And in order to do that, we got to take a closer look at this section here. So what we want to do is look at this little protrusion here, and we're going to touch it with our finger and pull down so that these pieces move like this, right? And we want to pull it down and keep it down. So we're going to use my left hand to do that. And then I'm going to put my index finger, the right hand, on top of this little protrusion, which is the opposite end of the spring. And I'm going to push as far as I can towards the head, and it'll pop down. See? Goes right down. And now we're going to need to take off this little plastic guy right here, because this part of the head, there's a little protrusion on the head, and it sticks up and sits right on top of this plastic guy. And that's a problem. What we're going to need is to do two things. We're going to need to push it out this way, but also put a fingernail or something, or a tool, and to kind of lift up on this little piece in the middle so we can push it out. You can do it with your hands without a tool and just take him right off. And now we're going to need to remove this piece, this metal part in the middle, but we can't do that because it's latched a little bit. However, you can slide, if you put your finger right here on these two guys, if you slide it towards the head, then it comes up a little bit. And that's what we need to do. We just need to slide it a little bit towards the head. And see that little guy right here? He moves out of the way, right? He's out of the way. And so now we can just pull up and out, and he's off. So now it's time to remove this little sliding part, which is held on by these 4 little round discs. I think they're made of vinyl, so I'm taking a little tiny flathead screwdriver. You'll need something flat to put under them so that you can pry up and lift them out like this. And you'll have to do that one at a time for each one of them. And then once you remove them, you can just lift it up and out. Now, in order to do a thorough cleaning, I'm going to remove the little metal brackets that are on the left and the right side of the drive. And we're going to need a Phillips screwdriver, nicely matched. If you use a screwdriver that's too small, then it will wobble around and you're going to strip your screws. And you don't want to do that, so you want to have one that's matching as perfectly as possible, because it's going to take some force sometimes. And you can hear it little cracking sound there. Nothing broke, nothing cracked. It just was locked down pretty hard. I don't think anybody has taken them off for a very long time. And there we go. Got this one. So this particular bracket over here is held on only by those two screws. And then on the opposite side, we have a screw here. And then we have a screw right over here. And then we have a screw that is on the bottom. And this screw is longer than the other ones. You just pull him up and out. Now, what I'm going to do is take a piece of plastic. This is not Tupperware, but you could use Tupperware. This is just happened to be a little convenient drawer. That was about the right size that I need. And I'm going to try to figure out how to put the pieces in so that I can fit everything in here to be about as low as possible, because if you're a frugal guy like me, you don't want to waste money. You know, alcohol costs money, so that seems to do it. And then I have some 100% isopropyl alcohol. 99% would do the job just as fine as well. And I'm going to be putting that in here, filling it up here. And this, I'm going to leave it for at least an hour. If you leave it in a couple hours, it's not going to be a problem. And just let it soak in this alcohol. And then I will later take a toothbrush to it, but you don't want it to evaporate, right? And so what I'm going to do, you can use a saran wrap if you want, but I'm going to at least attempt to put it into this Ziploc bag to eliminate much of the evaporation into the air. And then just zip him up and let him sit like that for a while. So I'm now going to clean off grease on these 4 points using a swab and my 100% IPA. Now that job is done, I'm going to clean the head by very carefully picking it up. You don't want to pull it up very high. You just want to pull it up to the amount it allows you to stick in a swab. And I have my 100% IPA here on the swab, and I'm twisting it as I'm cleaning both heads, because this is a double-sided drive. It has both top and bottom heads. And sometimes there's caked on gunk there, so you're going to have to take a magnifying glass to truly see it, because even if you clean the head and it still doesn't work, it could be that you didn't fully clean all of it off. But this is an important step since we're servicing the drive. I do wish to emphasize that you do not pull the head up beyond the height of a swab, because if you bend this piece of metal back here, which is holding on the top head, you're never going to get it back. I mean, you can try, but you don't want to bend this piece of metal out of shape. A little bit of normal bending is fine, of course, because it actually lifts up the head typically. But if you just pull it back like at a 45-degree angle or something, you will bend this metal and possibly ruin it. So just be very cautious whenever you clean the head, as I just did. In order to do further cleaning, I'm going to remove the head, and in order to do that, we have to remove these two ribbon cables. They have a firm piece of plastic on one side of each to make it easier to pull them out and put them in, but they are pretty fragile, so you want to be careful when you do pull them out. You can just use your index finger and a thumb to pull them out, and just pull it straight up and right out of that connector like that. The other one straight up and out. It's really not that difficult. And then after that, we need to take a small Phillips head screwdriver, and there are two black screws. One of them is here and the other one is here, and both of those are right near this chrome bar that the head slides on. You do not want to touch this gold colored screw. Absolutely do not do that. That will mess everything up if you do. Do not make a mistake. Make sure you only do this one here. So I'm gonna, if I can get it, it's kind of tough. Okay, there we go. Do this one here and take it all the way out. And then this one over here. I need to twist it hard. Now, with those two screws out, we can pull the head off, but it's important to note that there's this little worm gear over here, grooves in it, and you have a little pin that's sticking out from the head, so you need to slide it back and away from that worm gear. And again, don't accidentally pull up on the top part of the head, right? You need to pull it off just like this. And then what you want to do is just pull out this little bar here, and then you can put him on a tissue and clean him off with alcohol, and then we will oil him. We put him back on, and then on the flip side, right over here, you can see there's this little needle-like protrusion sticking out, and then of course there's this metal piece underneath it, so it grabs that worm gear with those two parts, and you can see it's got old grease on it, so we need to take our swab and clean this off as well, and then we will apply new grease on it. Now with the head removed, we can very clearly see the electrolytic capacitors. There are 6 total, 2 plus 1 over here, plus 2 over here, plus 1 over here. Check the text description below because I put a Mauser cart for you there. And even though you're probably not going to hear about a lot of people recapping floppy drives, that's just due to ignorance more than anything else. It seems like the drive is working, so people don't recap them. People usually don't recap something unless something's wrong, but that ignores the fact that fluid-filled capacitors do not have eternal life. It doesn't matter what they're installed on. They don't last forever, so recapping this would be a good idea to make sure your drive is working in tip-top shape. Now I'm going to take my swab filled with 100% IPA and just clean this worm gear, get all the old grease off of him, and you can see your swab will slowly start turning black once you do that, and you'll need to move him with your finger and rotate him round and around, and just keep going until you get most of that stuff off. Then after it's off and has a chance to dry, then you can put on some new grease and make him good as new. And with the old grease all cleaned off, now it's time to put on the new fresh Molykote EM30L or SuperLube grease. I'll put some SuperLube oil on this little slider bar here. Then we'll put our oiled up gear back to the head. I'll grease up this area. So I went ahead and recapped my board, and the height of these capacitors over here really doesn't matter so much. It's the ones in the front that matter, but basically even at 7 millimeters tall, higher than the stock, still the disc is not going to hit them when you put in the disc, so they're fine. And again, I put a cap list Mauser cart in the text description. I will now put the greased up head back in. We'll start with the worm gear side. I'm going to put the screws back in. And now I'll go ahead and put the side brackets back on. Don't forget the longest screw of the bunch goes in here. Now plug the ribbon cables back in. Not difficult. Now put in this movable guy here, And we need to consider all of the points of friction. So these guys will touch, so I'll put a little on them. And then on the bottom of this guy, there are little round points on it that I'll put some grease. We can kind of see a little trail of where it might need some grease, the scratched areas. So here's some grease. And I'm just following the scratch marks. And the grease now shows me the contact points. Looks like this might make contact over here. This doesn't really touch over here, so I'm just concerned about this side. And then put some grease on the angled areas, because this is where a roller will roll on them. Okay, I think that covers it. So now we can press down these little guys. We need to put these on to hold it down. It's going to hurt your thumb a little bit, but basically you just need to push it down with your thumb. Now, before putting this piece in, we need to do the full lube on him. And one of the things I noticed about this is that there are 4 rollers. 1, 2, 3, 4 rollers, right? And 3 of the 4 were seized up completely on mine. So I needed to put more alcohol on it. And then I kept turning them until I could get the crud out of each one of them. Seemed like they have grease in them. So I wouldn't recommend you put grease in it, but instead, use some of the SuperLube oil that I recommend, and put the oil on them. But before we do that, this and this point look like they will need to be greased. So I will add some of that here. And then for the parts over here, we don't want to put grease. This seems to touch, has some friction, so we'll put some oil on it. So we need to, there's a little protruding part here, so we need to put this side in here first, under this. And we need to put the little rollers into their respective U slots, right? And we can put this guy back on. Okay. Now we want to do our springs. And now we can make sure everything's going to move correctly. Yes. And we want to plug in our motor. And so now, with a little guy over here on this direction, we can put down our motor. Because if he's over here, then it might touch, right? So that's why you want to have him in the right position. So now we should be able to put in a disc, eject him, put in a disc, and eject him, and it should work just fine and be very smooth. Now, because it's a lot of trouble to test in a Color Classic, I'm just going to test really quick in a 2CI. You could use an SE30 or even an SE, something that's compatible with the drive to make it fast and easy. If you only have the Color Classic, you can do it. You just have to put it all back together again. So I want to test to see if there's any problems before I put the Color Classic back together. So I'm going to get ready to put in a disc. It's not fully inserted yet. I'm going to turn on the 2CI. The head moves back to the back position, and then I'm going to go ahead and put in a boot disc here. There it is, booting off the disc just fine. And hey, look, it ejected. Try that again. I'll eject the disc now. And the ejection is working. Now, in addition to the drive that I just lubed and fixed with the gear, tuno gear, I also have another drive here, which I very recently used the same, did exactly the same thing. The only thing I didn't do on this drive was recap it, but everything else, same amount of lubrication, same type of lubrication. I also swapped the gear. However, in this one, I have the Italian gear. And in the drive that I just showed you, I have the tuno gear from Kero. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these one at a time and eject to see if the sound is any different between them, because some people say, oh, the sound is different now that I've changed the gear. But you know, honestly, I don't have one that has the stock gear in it, so I can't really compare with that. But to compare with the Italian gear, because I showed you that they are a little bit different in regards to the inner teeth. And of course, one is a little bit smoother. The tuno gear is smoother than the other. So I'm going to let you hear for yourself how the eject motor sounds. It's the same OMRON motor, so that's not going to be any different. There might be some minor differences, but anyway, here we go. Let's try that again. One more time. Okay. Here's our tuno gear drive. Now that my Color Classic's reassembled, it's time for the final test. The disc is already inside, so let's eject. Wow, very smooth. In fact, the only smoother eject I've seen is the one famously done in space. Now, even though tuno gear has more play in the top gear than any other gear in that the teeth are more narrow, I cannot see a difference, I cannot hear a difference. It seems same as all other gears to me in that regard. But if you are a mechanical engineer who specializes in gears, please let me know your thoughts on why a more narrow tooth is beneficial. I'm not doubting Kay's good word. I'm sure he designed it that way for a very good reason. I'm just curious about the engineering side on why that makes it better. Now, the tuno gear and the Italian gear are the same in regards to the fact that they're both made in a mold. Neither one is 3D printed. I think that makes them better because you don't see those little printing lines, you know. The tolerances are tighter. They're made better overall. And again, I've used the Italian gear to date without any troubles, but the similarities in there. Tuno gear is perfectly smooth to the touch. When Kero sent me a gear for the very first time and I put it in my hands, I said, he didn't make this. How could anybody make this? It must be new old stock, I thought. It's so smooth, folks. It's just beautifully smooth. It makes you want to cry, it's so smooth. And it's fabulous. And you saw it under a microscope. There are no bubble imperfections whatsoever. And that's why I think it gives tuno gear the edge when it comes to quality, of course, but also strength and potentially even long-term durability too. And that's why I wholeheartedly recommend tuno gear whenever you want to replace gears in your 800K or 1.44 megabyte auto-inject floppy drives that have the OMRON motor. Kay, you make a fantastic product. Now, if you happen to have a motor which is the Sanwa version, no fear, I put a link to CayMac Vintage in the text description below, and I believe that they are the only vendor who sell gears that are compatible with the Sanwa motor floppy drives. Next, I have, oh yes, in the text description, I put a Mauser cart for you. So that contains all of the capacitors for the 1.44 megabyte floppy drive. That'll make it easier if you decide to recap, and I would recommend it even if your drives are working. Now, one thing I'd like to say, a few more words about CayMac's Universal ROM SIMM. This is an 8 meg version. Keep your eye on the CayMac Coffee store. I put a link for you in the text description below, because this is scheduled to be released sometime this month, perhaps before Christmas. And again, this is for the 8 megabyte version. They will also release a slightly lower cost 4 megabyte version sometime in January. And this is really a fantastic product, and the reason they call it Universal is because it still works with all of the traditional machines like the SE30, but now it works for on machines that have never traditionally been supported by any ROM SIMM, such as the LC575, and such as Quadras like the Quadra 700 or even the Quadra 840 AV. And what I really love about it, yes, you can boot from ROM and do other things like that, but it kills that painfully slow RAM checking at cold boot. And it's fantastic for my Mystic because until now I've only had 32 megabytes, the 32 megabyte SIMM in here, because if I installed a 128 megabyte SIMM, it'd probably take no less than 2 minutes for the RAM check to complete and then booting to start. And I didn't want that, so I always kept less RAM in here. But now with this, yes, you will have to solder in a socket in the LC575 motherboard, but there are holes. The holes for a socket are there. Apple just never installed the socket. So you just remove the solder from the holes and then install the socket, which isn't really that hard. And it is so worth it because now my Mystic boots, or at least starts booting, before the screen even comes on, which is really fast. And not only that, but they are also working on some new features of this to make it programmable in system, which means you won't have to remove it to reprogram it. Yes, you can remove it if you'd like, and you can put it in a dedicated programmer like CayMac's wonderful ROM Mate that was created in conjunction with Doug Brown. See my video for more information on that. You can still do that, but it will be reprogrammable in certain Macs which have a minimum 1 megabyte or larger ROM size, which means it wouldn't work in an SE30, but on some machines like this, being able to program it without tearing apart the machine, that's fantastic. But again, work is still going on with regards to that. And Joachim Larsson is the engineer who has done primarily the work on this particular ROM SIMM, but Joachim worked in close collaboration with Downtown Doug Brown and Steve Chamberlain, a big mess of wires to bring this to you. So I think it's a fantastic product. So keep your eyes peeled on the CayMac Coffee Store for more information. Again, the link is in the text description below. Before I go, you may have noticed my t-shirt looks a little bit familiar. It should, because this is the very first t-shirt that Apple created presenting the Macintosh, worn by Bill Atkinson in 1984. I don't think Apple ever sold this shirt because I've only ever seen Bill Atkinson wearing it in those old photos. I've always thought the shirt looks neat, so I decided to recreate the design as vector art and then asked Javier Rivera of 8-Bit Tees if he might be interested in carrying it. He kindly agreed and now offers the shirt in a variety of sizes, shipping worldwide. I don't get any kind of compensation whatsoever if 8-Bit Tees sells you this shirt. Again, I thought it was really neat and I wanted to make it available to all of you, and thanks to 8-Bit Tees, now that's possible. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and please subscribe and click the bell icon if you'd like to receive notifications of more content like this. And if you'd like to go the extra mile and become a channel supporter, I have a PayPal link in the text description below. Thank you for watching today, folks. Now it's your turn to go out and start fixing those 800K and 1.44 megabyte floppy drives with Kay Koba's fantastic Tuno gear. Have a great week, folks. Bye-bye.